part of the public comment period or part of the meeting, you can call 844-9200. When the phone's picked up, you'll hear a prompt. You're going to dial 398145 followed by the pound sign. You will hear question and answering has started. At that time, you'll press the star followed by the number 6. You will hear, if you would like to speak, press 1 to be added. At that time, you'll press 1. While you're in queue, you'll hear an audio feed of the meeting and what's being said before you. And then when you're prompted by the moderator, you can come on board and share your comments with council. And before we get to other parts, I'll give that number off again. Item number 2. Item number 2 is to adopt our meeting agenda. Has everybody had a chance to look at our meeting agenda?
I move for approval.
Do we have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Sam. Is there any discussion about any of the items? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Item number 3 is our consent agenda. Item 3 is to consider the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Dr. Hossetter. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Bruce. Everybody's got a mask on, you know. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. And then the item number 4 is one that I really like because it gives me a chance to recognize some of our Waynesboro employees. And in order to do this, I got to remove my mask because my glasses fog up to read this. But we've got our employees do outstanding work for our community, and every once in a while we get some that stand out and get awards, and I just want to bring those to attention to the community tonight. The first one we have is Dwayne Swartz. Dwayne Swartz was awarded the Herbert W. Evans Distinguished Service Award, and this award came from the Virginia chapter of the American Water Works Association. This award is given in recognition of the demonstrated activities of a member of the association who has contributed outstanding participation, counsel, and progressiveness in the Virginia section for a period of not less than 10 years. Dwayne started his career with the city of Waynesboro in 1999 as a utility worker in public works and has worked his way up through the ranks, and now he serves as the operations coordinator and has, since 2018, the water treatment plant manager. We've got some of the best water in the state, folks, and it's contributed to our workers and Dwayne. So I wanted to thank Dwayne for his hard work and bringing Waynesboro to the forefront of water in the state. The second is for a promotion within our fire department, and that promotion is George Fitzgerald. George was the fire marshal in Waynesboro. I'm a fire investigator by trade. I work and do fire investigations all across the U.S., and a couple of years ago, I met George at a couple of fire scenes, and I came in behind him and worked for the insurance industry. George is a top-notch fire investigator, and recently he's been promoted from the deputy fire marshal, and now he's being recognized for his hard work and knowledge, professionalism, and was promoted to deputy fire chief in September. So congratulations to Deputy Chief Fitzgerald for your hard work and recognition in the form of promotion. And then the last one is kind of bittersweet for the entire community. Captain Kelly Walker retired with 35 years of service from the Waynesboro Police Department. Kelly started his public service. My notes here are actually incorrect because Kelly and I served on the Waynesboro Junior First Aid Crew back in the late 70s, and that's where Kelly really started his public service work and where he and I became friends. But after graduating high school, Kelly joined the United States Army. After he ETS from the Army, he joined the Waynesboro Police Department in 1985 as a parole officer. He held just about every position in the police department, from patrol officer, dare officer, corporal, sergeant, patrol shift commander, and ultimately he retired as a captain of the services division. Kelly is also a pioneer within the department because he helped build and make the Blue Ridge Crisis Intervention Team, which is a multidisciplinary group dedicated to improving police interaction with people experiencing acute episodes of mental illness. Kelly does this job really well, and he did this job really well. So I'm proud of Kelly for all the accomplishments he had over the years. So I want to express that the city's really going to miss him being in service here, but we know Kelly's around, and we wish him the best of luck in retirement. Next is going to be item number 5, which is matters for city council. Does anybody have anything they would like to share tonight?
I don't have anything, Terry.
Okay. No matters from council. We're going to go right into the agenda then. Item number 6 is going to be for a public hearing to vacate a at-grade railroad crossing at 7th Street. Item 6 is to accept viewer report and upon request of the city and in cooperation with VDOT, hold a public hearing to consider introduction of an ordinance to vacate the at-grade crossing at 7th Street and Commerce Avenue in connection with the Southern Corridor Road Project. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I think it might be helpful and worth emphasizing if I make some introductory remarks, which will you'll also detect in the presentation by staff. But I think it's beneficial to emphasize and affirm that the city is in fact proposing as the applicant for the closing, and that's a little bit exceptional in the course of our work. As the city manager, I signed the application, and my signature reflects the recommendation and my hope that the council ultimately approves the requested closure, which is a condition for a permit for an at-grade crossing at another location in the city, and is part of a larger project, the Southern Corridor Road Project. Technically, VDOT is the applicant for that permit, but as doing so in cooperation with the city. This evening, Mr. Luke Juday, the Director of Planning, and Mr. Greg Hitchen will present information about the process used for evaluating the application or the request, and the transportation and economic benefits that accrue from the Southern Corridor Road Project, for which the new crossing is essential. I would acknowledge that, as you'll hear in the presentation of the viewers, there will be resulting inconvenience if the application is approved. But my remarks here are simply also to affirm that I acknowledge those inconveniences, but feel like that the opportunity and the benefits associated with the Southern Corridor Road Project are worthy of consideration and balance against the inconveniences that occur for those impacted residents in the neighborhood. And so with that, I'll hand it off to my colleagues. Mr. Juday will begin the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. The application is to vacate a public easement for an at-grade crossing of the Norfolk Southern Railroad tracks at 7th Street near Commerce Avenue in the Basic City area. This is what the crossing looks like today. As you can see, it's an at-grade crossing. It's located just between Commerce Avenue East and Commerce Avenue, where the odd numbers are. This is not a normal right-of-way vacation in that we are not actually vacating right-of-way. We are vacating a public easement for passage over the railroad track. So we are not actually giving up any land. That's why there's no land value involved. Sometimes with a right-of-way vacation, there's some kind of assessment that happens. And there's no relinquishing of any other claims that are associated with that. We are merely vacating the easement for public passage over the railroad track. City Council on this situation has to appoint viewers who comment on whether the project is likely to cause any inconvenience. And I'll get to that slide in a second, but the viewers concluded that it would cause inconvenience. Currently, this railroad crossing is used by about 1,000 cars a day. As you can see, this is all the crossings that the city has over the Norfolk Southern Railroad track, ordered by the closest ones. So we would expect the majority of the traffic that's diverted by this crossing to go to East Main Street, where there's a separated grade underpass. We would also expect a certain number of cars to go to the 4th Street Jack Higgs Bridge, so probably a smaller number, and that's a very narrow bridge and only handles about a car at a time. And then we would also expect a smaller number to be diverted to the 2nd Street Bridge Avenue crossing. which is also a separated grade bridge. The only other at-grade crossing that we have over this rail line is the Windsor Avenue crossing, which handles about 4,200 cars a day. This thing is not clicking through for me here. There we go. The viewers are tasked with looking at the vacation request and determining whether it would or would not inconvenience the public. A lot of times when we have a vacation request, it's some kind of undeveloped alley somewhere, and they have to comment on that. They concluded that it would inconvenience the public and made several notes for you all, which were included in your packet as an attachment on what that inconvenience would be to the public, that it would divert traffic in this area by 2 to 3 blocks in either direction, and that I think would be a loss for the properties immediately adjacent to it. So why would we be recommending it? Again, I mentioned before, and I think I was misunderstood as saying that we were not in favor of it. We are in favor of this vacation. We're not in favor of it on its own. This isn't something that we look at and say, well, we would have done that anyway. We've been wanting to close that crossing or anything like that. But the railroad has been wanting to close that crossing. It's one of their higher liability crossings in this area. And the railroad requires a 3-to-1 trade to approve any new at-grade crossing. And that's fairly consistent across the state. We don't know of any projects that have gotten out of that. In 2014, City Council approved an application for a smart-scale project that's a $17 million project in the southern part of the city to build a connector road stretching from Shenandoah Village Drive, extending from behind the Target Town Center, all the way east to Delphine Avenue, South Delphine Avenue. And so that would connect the eastern and western sides of the city and reduce travel times for residents on the southern side of the city. But it would primarily benefit the city in that it would provide access to the industrial park and to other properties in that area. And Mr. Greg Hitchen, the Director of Economic Development, will present a little bit more on that. But the situation with the crossing is that from the beginning, when council approved the project, this was the rail crossing that the Railroad Express would need to be part of that trade. To get the rest of the at-grade crossings, there's going to be a private crossing closed on the Lycra Company's property, and VDOT, which is managing the project, also found a crossing in the Front Rural area that can be closed to benefit our project. VDOT is managing the project and managing these discussions, and so we're taking our cues from them, and this is the agreement that they had worked out with the railroad. This is a necessary step that we will have to take, unfortunately, in order for that project to move forward. If we can't close the crossing, we can't get an at-grade crossing, and that road project will stall. So because of that, and because of the benefits that we believe will accrue to the public from construction of the Southern Connector, staff is recommending approval of the crossing, acknowledging and recognizing that it will cause some inconvenience to the public. I'm going to pass this off now to Mr. Greg Hitchen, who will present more about the Southern Connector.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you for the opportunity tonight. As Mr. Dujay mentioned, I'm going to provide some additional detail on the Southern Corridor project and the benefits that this brings to us. Mr. Dujay already outlined the smart scale project and the project at all, but I just wanted to orientate you to where that really is, just so we can have a common language as we go forward tonight. The orange line at the top of the photo in the back is Interstate 64 with exit 94 Town Center on the left, exit 96 Delphine on the right, with Corner Springs in the middle. Our two industrial parks are also along this line. The dotted yellow line is the current Shenandoah Village Drive. The solid yellow line is the Southern Corridor project that we're talking about. The Smart Scale application in 2014 had two main goals listed in it. The first one is to reduce congestion in the exit 94 area, which includes the two entrances into the town center. But this congestion also affects the on and off ramps to Interstate 64, as well as traffic all the way down Rosser and up Lou DeWitt. This opportunity will also provide greater access to the park and ride, the VDOT park and ride, which is behind Chick-fil-A Taco Bell, and also provides options for visitors to the town center that are going east to not get on the interstate highway or not take a city street, but travel this parallel road over to Delphine, which would give them access to Augusta County to the south, to downtown to the north, or perhaps get on Interstate 64 there at exit 96. The second goal of this was to improve and enhance future industrial, retail, office, and other development along the path. This shot shows a total of 320 acres that are available for development along this path. The blue areas are privately owned land, and the yellow areas are city-owned industrial park. The blue areas are a total of 115 acres, and the city yellow areas is a total of 205 acres. We're going to focus on the two city sites just for a moment. The Waynesboro Commons and Industrial Park, that's the city legacy park that includes Cintas, Berry Plastics, DuPont Credit Union, and Chantel. And Nature's Crossing Technology Center is the new city park currently under development. We've done a little bit of work in both of those areas. The Commerce and Industrial Park is on the west end of the project. You can see the solid yellow line at the bottom right-hand corner of this picture. That's the Southern Corridor project coming through that area. There's a total of 35 acres available here that the city owns. This diagram up on the screen now shows about 17 of those acres and how we can position one or two buildings, bringing it to a total of 160 to 200,000 square feet with the appropriate stormwater parking, et cetera, all the other things that we might need to fit in there. So that's an opportunity, again, for 17 acres of development and 200,000 square foot of building. The second piece of this is the Nature's Crossing Technology Center. Again, the solid yellow line at the bottom of this is the Southern Corridor picture. And this is one of the configurations we have for this park. We'll talk more about that later. The park is a total of 170 acres. If we leave the flood zone, wetlands, and some other areas undeveloped, we have 100 acres of developable land. A key component of Nature's Crossing Technology Center is the availability to have multiple rail sites. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. The red circle indicates the rail crossing that is within the site that we've talked about needing to have an at-grade rail crossing. And again, the idea behind the Southern Corridor Road is to take the truck traffic out to the left to Delphine, up to Interstate 64, while maintaining through traffic of cars coming from Augusta County or other parts east into the town center, and then exiting out of town center, people going west of the town center, going east out of the town center. One of the typical rules of thumb for site consultants when they are siting, looking for land for opportunities like we're going to pursue, is they want to be at 55 miles an hour within 5 minutes. So we're 55 miles an hour within 1 minute from this site. So it's a very optimum site, and we think is going to do really well. Why is this important? Well, according to JLL, which is Jones Lang LaSalle, a global commercial real estate services company, in a report published this summer, so post-COVID outbreak, they estimate that industrial growth will need over 1 billion square feet of space by 2025. Colliers International, also a global commercial real estate firm, also post-COVID outbreak, predicts that they agree that there'll be growth in the market. They also state that America's freight railroads play a critical role in nearly every industrial, wholesale, retail, and resource-based sector of our economy. A managing director of that same firm stated, "Industrial in Virginia is a strong reflection of national industrial trends. Logistics and distribution growth has created very tight industrial markets in both nationwide and in Virginia. The Shenandoah Valley is a hidden jewel for East Coast distribution." Last summer, Colliers identified the Shenandoah Valley as one of the top 10 emerging markets. So national real estate firms think that the industrial market is growing. They think it's going to be very competitive, that Virginia is competitive, and that the Shenandoah Valley is prime for development. According to Virginia Economic Development Partnership, approximately 15% of the state's greenfield request for proposals, that is new business attraction opportunities, during the last 18 months have requested some sort of rail. 8 of the projects in 2020 of the Shenandoah Valley Partnership have requested rail. So over the time of development, we've looked at Nature's Crossing Technology Center a number of different ways. A bunch of little buildings, a bunch of big buildings, a combination of big buildings and little buildings, all told about 6 different possible configurations. They all add up to kind of the same thing. We have 1.2 million square feet of industrial space when it's all said and done. We have the possibility of 2 or 3, probably just 2, rail sites of about 40 acres, which fit exactly into what the market is demanding. You may also remember that this is in one of our enterprise zones, so it gets additional incentives and marketing from the state. You recently put part of this into our technology zone, which has statutory incentives for certain types of technology businesses, and it's also in the federal opportunity zone. So what does this all mean? VDOT predicts that the Southern Corridor Road will be completed in 2023. So based on that estimate, we've looked at some different configurations and determined an economic impact for that. As you might imagine, there's lots of variables that go into this. We based some solid foundation of 1.2 million square feet, 100 acres of developable land, again, preserving the wetlands, and focusing on manufacturing, logistics, and technology companies. We looked out 15 years from 2024, so 1 year past when the road is completed, and we estimated 4 projects, so 4 buildings on that site. 1 every 2 years, so relatively slow growth, slow construction to get up to speed. We think there'll be $1 to $2 million annually to the city budget, so an additional $1 to $2 million of city revenue, 500 to 700 jobs, and a $20 to $30 million payroll. Now you're probably thinking $1 million is a big spread, 200 jobs is a big spread, and $10 million of payroll is a pretty big spread. It all depends on what happens to the different industries between now and then. All those variables were in place. COVID threw a big monkey wrench into the whole thing. So we know manufacturing is expanding, but changing, becoming more automated. More automation means more machinery and tools tax, probably less employees, but higher paid employees to run the machines. If it's a data center, few employees, higher wages. If it's logistics, lots of employees, lower wages. So lots of different variables can go into how these things are made. But again, we think at the very minimum, it's going to be $1 million of city revenue. Be happy to answer any questions or provide any additional data at this time.
Anybody got questions for Mr. Hitchens?
Just probably out of, I appreciate the discussion and observation. So I appreciate the last slide in particular about outcomes, and I think you've done a good job of sort of sharing what outcomes are, and not entirely germane perhaps to the conversation tonight, but I would be interested to understand, to receive an update about what are the upfront costs, right? Because that just doesn't happen. There's no utilities on site, there's no pad readiness on site, and so how much is that going to cost? How much are taxpayers going to have to contribute to make that a reality? And what's the return on investment relative to all of that?
We absolutely have all that information. It would take an hour to go through, so I don't think we want to do that tonight, but I'd be happy to discuss that, as well as overall site development tiers, and there's a whole conversation that needs to go into that conversation, but we have all that data available for you at any time.
Awesome. So we just, that is all I have relative to the economic development side of it. But I did hear, I think it was either your presentation or Luke's, this regarding a priority location, it's a priority liability location for Norfolk Southern at the crossing, and that they have identified that before as a priority, I imagine from a safety standpoint. If it goes into a yard, so they're at class 2, they're running at no more than probably 20 miles an hour anyway. In that location, I pulled up Google Earth. It doesn't appear that they've made any improvements for probably several decades to that, and so I would be interested to better understand what they mean by a priority location. Are there crashes that have occurred there? Are there other, because anybody can say it's a liability, I'd be interested to know to what extent that actually is.
Just to respond to that, I can't really answer any of that information since, as I mentioned, it's a VDOT managed project and they're the ones that are discussing this with the railroad. So I know that from the beginning of the project that this crossing was discussed as needing to potentially be closed for it, but I'm not sure the details of why exactly or what the railroad's position is or what that's based on, but.
I think any at-grade rail crossing is a big liability for them, and that's where they view any at-grade crossing.
That would go for vehicles and pedestrians.
I will say that, unfortunately, the way that state law works, national law works, we're very much at the mercy of the railroad. I mean, they own the crossing, and so we can't, there's nothing that, you can't do eminent domain. There's nothing that we could do as a city to make the project happen without this kind of a deal like this.
Yeah. I think that was.
Maybe not how it should work, but that's how it works.
I thought that was an important observation or inclusion, was that this is a matter of, it's an easement. There's no right of way to be had.
Yeah. They actually own the land underneath the easement. Yeah, we don't own it's not a railroad crossing our road. It's our road crossing their railroad. So, yeah.
Dr. Hussler, do you have something?
Well, in noting our viewers and their report, as you said, the 1,100 or so vehicles, the concern they raise about the Jack Higgs Bridge and its future and its condition, and as you said, it is a single lane bridge, so that it's not going to take a whole lot more traffic. I've heard from some citizens already just the concern of, what does that do, putting us out, trying to turn left onto Main Street and trying to think through those safety issues. Is the decision tonight, if we open an ordinance, is it passed tonight, or is it something that has to be reviewed for next?
Carries over to the next
Yeah.
meeting.
So it would be something that would come back to us for further conversation.
I should have also mentioned, and I missed it during my presentation, but the actual closure, the actual physical dismantling of the road enclosure would be contingent on being granted that at-grade crossing further down. So as Mr. Hitchen mentioned, the actual road construction date is closer to 2023 now. If something else happens with the road and it gets delayed further, the crossing would not be closed until the road is constructed.
Okay.
I believe is
And
how
that
we
was going to be
worded
my
the-
next question, is what's the
Yeah.
time frame on the actual
Yeah.
closure, if there is a deal made? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff?
Thank you, Greg. Thank you.
But you are agreeing to it now, don't.
Pardon?
Said, but you are agreeing to it now, so don't approve it now thinking you can revisit it later, so, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I hereby open the public hearing, and as such, we'll open the public hearing and hear speakers. Let me give this phone number one more time if you wish to make public comment during this hearing. The phone number is 844-844-9200. You'll be prompted to enter the code 398145, followed by the pound sign. When the phone is answered, you'll hit *6. You'll be asked to press number 1 to be added. Once you press number 1, you'll hear the audio feed of the meeting, and when it's your turn to speak, you'll be introduced and brought into the room to speak. With that, I open the public hearing. We get a speaker?
Yes, sir. So I would inform the council and inform those in attendance. We had 2 sign-up sheets, actually. One for general comments under the citizen comment period, and a sign-up sheet for this public hearing specifically. I had no one sign up for the public hearing specifically, but I have several individuals who signed up under the general comments and identified the crossing as their topic. So I'm going to call on those individuals. The first individual to sign up is Mr. Lewis Price.
Mi-
No place to sign up for the community. Y'all wasn't a bit ready for us to be here for our comments tonight. If you were, you wouldn't all be wearing those masks and talking off, take them off when we're talking. Or you should have more respect for us. You shouldn't be sitting there talking with yours on.
Well,
Where were y'all?
Mr. Lewis, do you want to make a public comment?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
come
speaking.
up to the podium, tell people who you
I
are.
can't get up on there.
Well, pull it down towards you so you can talk on it, okay? There you go. Now tell the people what you want to say. We'll give you 4 minutes. The green light is on. When it turns yellow, start winding down your comment. When it turns red, you should be finishing up, okay?
First, I said, you want me to say all of it again?
You want to take your mask off? I can't hear you either.
Well, then, if you couldn't hear me, why do you expect me to hear you? Y'all weren't ready for us to make comments.
We are ready, but we've got to follow the same rules that everybody else follows,
It
okay?
don't look like to me you have.
Well, your time is starting. Go ahead and make your comment.
All right. Where were y'all when they were closing down Waynesboro up there? Where did you get the money to buy all that property up there? You had other things down there. Now, over here, I'm speaking for 17 residents that I have over there within a block of that crossing. You didn't do anything to really publicize you want to get it closed and tell me that they were trading, it's a trade-off. The trade-off was you just gonna take all you want. That's what I've got to say. And I would have thought y'all would have been prepared enough. I couldn't see the sign because it was up behind me. If you'd have known you were doing it for us, y'all would have had something up there where we could all see it. Most of y'all already know what it is. I've said enough.
Thank you, sir, for your comment.
Ms. Tanya Kidd?
Good evening. I own, actually, the last meeting that I was in, we were talking about zoning for this area right here in Basic. And that meeting resulted in, I bought that 300 block that was a problem, and the city wanted to see something done with it, and we've been in the development of that block. This closing is going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact. I get that from the city's perspective, you've got to weigh the pros and cons for both. And I get that there's a lot of, from what Mr. Hutchins said, that there's a lot of economic benefit to the city for this closure and doing this trade-off. But I want to stand just to make sure that everybody's aware, this is a trade-off. That's what we're doing. And so I have approximately 100 residents there in this new development, and we're right there. I'm at 7th and Commerce, so I'm on both sides of 7th. So it's going to have an impact. I think it's more than an inconvenience for those who are living in Basic. My biggest thing is we need to understand that at some point, Waynesboro is very, very underutilized for its potential. And one of the things that's come up is that Basic itself it has so much potential it is not being tapped into. That's what I do, and that's what I'm doing because the city wanted that, and the residents spoke and wanted that. So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or if you disagree, but I acted quickly on that. So at some point, everybody's got to realize if you do the trade-off, you keep trading off Basic, which does seem to be put on the back burner a lot, but you keep trading off and you're going to lose the potential that is there in Basic. Me as a business person, I can work around these things, but it's going to cause issue for the people who live there. It's going to cause issue for the businesses that I'm bringing in. I mean, if there's a benefit, and especially so much of a financial benefit to this trade-off, then what should Basic be getting out of this? If there's $1 million extra going to the city for this trade-off, then that money ought to be considered, very seriously considered, for the development of commerce, of the beautification of commerce. So if you want to take from commerce, give back. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Ms. Kidd.
So those are the only individuals that signed up to speak. Again, if there was some confusion around sign up, you may leave it to your judgment if you extend it.
Okay. Are there any phone calls in? Thank you, mister. No other speakers. I will close the public hearing. And I will ask, is there a motion to introduce this ordinance that will not be voted on tonight, but be brought up again on our October 26th business meeting?
I'll introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen made the introduction. Is there a second? I'll make the second. This motion will carry over till our October 26th business meeting. Item number 7 is the Basic City Land Use Plan. Item number 7 is to receive a presentation from Luke Jade regarding the proposed Basic City Land Use Plan. Mr. Jade.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I want to thank Ms. Kidd, who was involved in this process to a certain extent, and also emphasize what she said, which was that, you can't make trade-offs that hurt Basic City without giving back to Basic City as well. And I think that needs to become a priority for the city. It was discussed during the comp plan process in the past. And so we've been having some discussions on the Planning Commission about what to do over in that area. We've done a couple of outreach meetings. We've done 3 public meetings. One, we discussed mostly city services, policing, property maintenance. Residents brought up quite a few concerns about property maintenance issues and policing in that area, and those have been passed on to the relevant departments. We had one that was more focused on soliciting input for public projects. We don't have a lot to bring you there, but one was also focused on land use in the Commerce Avenue corridor, and that's mostly what I'd like to talk about tonight. We also did a property owner survey in the area. We sent out surveys to every property owner on between Commerce Avenue and Delphine Avenue. That's about 70 property owners. We only got 17 responses, so it wasn't a great response rate, but we still got some great feedback from them. And we had a series of Planning Commission discussions following that were all open meetings. So that's the extent of the public input that's gone into this proposal. I'll just say quickly on the public projects front, we have some items in our transportation plan that are mentioned for this area, and I've this year we've pushed to get some of the CDBG money devoted to this area, and so we are currently working with the city's consulting engineers, McCormick and Taylor, to try to design a 4th Street sidewalk improvement and Delphine crossing pedestrian refuge. It'll make it easier to cross Delphine Avenue. We've also expanded the facade grant program to East Main Street, though we've not received any applications for the businesses out there yet, but I want to emphasize to businesses that are on East Main Street that is available to them. East Main Street streetscape is coming down the pike probably in 2024 as well. We've discussed Sunset Park, but that's something that the city would have to decide to fund in a capital improvement plan, and so it's not something that there is grant money available for. But there are plenty of other needs that we could pursue in the future, including sort of sidewalk, road repairs, safe pedestrian crossings, et cetera. So that's the public project side of it. Don't have the main thing that I'm here to talk to you about tonight is the land use side. This area is the source of a lot of frustrations for property owners, applicants, potential business entrepreneurs, and building and zoning and planning folks because of the broad mix of uses that exist there. We have houses right next to industrial large factories, right next to stores that are scattered around, the area largely developed without a lot of, without zoning, without a lot of land use regulations. And so there are all kinds of vested rights and, existing uses throughout that area. We have a lot of LI, which is light industrial zoning, scattered in, we have an average of, one LI zone property about every other block throughout all the residential areas of this area. And LI allows a lot of uses that are a nuisance to adjacent residential areas. It also doesn't allow housing, so sometimes you have confusing situations where you might have an LI parcel and someone wants to build a house, there's a house next to it, but they're not allowed to build a house on it. Then conversely, we have a lot of RG5 and LB zoned properties that don't allow heavier, larger businesses, and oftentimes we'll have folks say, well, I'd like to put this kind of business in this building, and we say, well, no, that's not allowed in the LB zone. And say, well, this business exists just down the street, and say, well, that's actually an LI property. And so there is a lot of confusion that results from that. We call it spot zoning in planning, when the zoning, the idea behind zoning is that it should be a zone. It should be a large area where roughly the same rules apply, not something that's piece by piece in every particular parcel. So that's the frustration that we're dealing with there. Here's a picture of the zoning map. You can see that there's some logic to it, but there's mostly LB zoning between Commerce and Delphine, and LB allows sort of neighborhood retail. It's a sort of a catch-all zone for smaller intensity. It's not supposed to be the Target center, but it's supposed to be, smaller stores, smaller businesses. RG5 is sort of our general residential zone. These gray parcels are the LI parcels, as you can see, that are scattered around through all the different residential blocks. We have some random RMF zoning stuck in there. We have almost every zoning, I think we have every zoning district in the city almost on this map. As you can see, there's something of a hodgepodge of uses there. I'm gonna move this along. There we go. The land use map, the land use guide that we currently operate with doesn't give us a ton of guidance here. Most of the area is designated as medium density residential with some industrial along the river. And then we have this mixed use D corridor running along Commerce Avenue on both sides of the tracks, which the land use guide specifies as being for civic spaces, public parks, restaurants, convenience retail, and a variety of residential housing types. It's sort of targeting, a small, low intensity downtown type of neighborhood retail like that LB zoning gives us. Doesn't tell us much, but it does push us in a direction towards kind of the residential zoning. It's kind of saying clamp down on the industrial zone stuff over time, try to close the heavier stuff and push it towards housing, which is one possible answer. We think it'll be difficult to make progress in that direction for a long time because you have a lot of existing uses, and that it might not be exactly what the property owners are interested in. So the current vision as we have it laid out right now is a residential area with an industrial belt on one side and a neighborhood retail corridor on the other side on Commerce Avenue. So what's working about that now? We have quite a few blocks of homes that are in good shape. Where homeowners are taking care of them. We have other blocks that are struggling. We have an industrial area along the river that still has several very large facilities. But there are quite a few things that are not working about it as well. One of them being conflicts between industrial properties that are scattered in among those residential properties. Another one being the large number of vacancies along Commerce Avenue and difficulty in getting businesses to locate there. And especially the type of business that our zoning allows. We're targeting that kind of small shops and retail type of thing, the kind of thing you would want to see on Main Street. But as you're aware, it's very hard to get those folks to come to Main Street even, and that's in the middle of the city on a main road. So there's just a limited supply of that kind of retail. And we also are already focused on trying to get that onto East Main Street as well. And then you have a situation where, I'll come back to this in a second, with traffic where Delphine Avenue was expanded in the late 20th century and has become the main corridor with 11,000 cars a day, and East Main Street has become a main corridor, but Commerce Avenue, which was a corridor when the passenger rail traffic was heavier, has sort of shrunk in significance compared to Delphine. And so you don't have the pedestrian traffic that you need for that kind of small retailer. It's very hard, as Ms. Kidd has alluded to. It's hard to get that going. And so in that context, we feel like the current zoning limiting you to that, saying this is what we're trying to get, you have to build cute little shops, is not, it's not helping. It's not helping the area to develop. We did look into historic preservation. There's a 2011 survey concluded the area did not have a high enough concentration of historic properties remaining. We contacted VDH and had them do another survey last year. They were more optimistic that a zone could be put together, but the property owners would need to mostly be on board, and as of now, most of them oppose this. And that would really only restrict people from tearing properties down. It wouldn't necessarily do a whole lot for us in the short run, but in case that's a question, we've been looking into that. So this is, to me, one of the key issues that we need to understand is that a lot of our vision for that is based on Commerce Avenue being a little main street, like it was in the railroad era, and that is just going to be very difficult in the current configuration. For one thing, it's single loaded on one side of the street, and Delphine is now the arterial. When we do have inquiries about sort of retail type of commercial activity, it's normally to be on Delphine. We do have other tenants that often want to locate in this area. We had one that I bring up as an example frequently last year. They were an artisanal blacksmith operation. They made copper like pots and pans and knives that they sold to high-end restaurants. And they were kind of a business that was technically manufacturing, but it was very small scale. And they employed a lot of people, and they wanted to be in kind of an urban area where they could have event space and do, serve food and do events outside and that type of thing. So sort of a mix type of use. We have other uses like McClung Printing is on Commerce Avenue, and that is really not allowed by the current zoning. So that's a non-conforming use that is, again, it's not a factory. It's not like it's belching smoke, but that's a business that's employing people in that location that's not allowed by our current zoning. And so those kinds of applicants that come to us and want to locate in here, we say, no, that's not allowed. And so the point of our property owner survey was to say, which direction should we go with this? Do we keep the zoning tight and try to hold out for the kinds of uses that we're envisioning? Or do we open that up and say, it'd be better to have somebody here than nobody? And it'd be better to have something happening here than nothing happening? And what kinds of things could that be that might be compatible without undermining the residences that are scattered throughout this area as well? And this isn't the only area like this. We talked about Ohio Street before, and I'll bring that up later as well. The survey respondents were mixed. They leaned towards expanding the range of uses and encouraging new development, but several homeowners also, complained about that and said, no, just keep it locked down for now until, most were still opposed to uses that would not bring activity to the area. So we gave them a list of uses and got them to kind of give us how do you feel about this on that. And they were still pretty negative about things like towing lots and warehousing and self-storage that, don't bring a lot of activity to that zone. But they were more positive about a lot of other uses that aren't currently allowed by the zoning. So the conclusion that Planning Commission came to in discussing this is that we don't have a zone that really fits this area. All our zones are designed for different other parts of the city, and this is a type of neighborhood that we don't have a good framework for in our zoning code. And so we end up defaulting to either LB, which is too restrictive, or LI, which is too loose and also too restrictive of residences. So what we need is something that captures the feeling, the type of area that this is. So we don't have a good name for it yet. We've thought of industrial revitalization. I don't know that I want to call it industrial because it's not really the point. Talked about MXB, mixed business. But the idea would be to form a zone that is for areas that have underutilized legacy industrial and commercial buildings, so areas that were heavily industrial before and had all kinds of buildings that are difficult to redevelop, that are in close proximity to residences, so we can't just put a poultry factory there. They've got to be things that are compatible with homes, that are in an established urban subdivision pattern. That means that's city blocks, probably buildings built right up to the street. There's not necessarily lots of space for parking. You can't just throw up a huge suburban, follow all these, all the kinds of access management requirements that we might have down in the West End or around the Target Center. And it would be not for use in new subdivisions. This is really primarily trying to get these areas to be better reused. So the proposed list of uses we came up with would be the most broad within our current zoning code. We would be trying to reduce barriers to reuse, so opening it up to people that had more creative ideas. Maybe they have a mixed sort of like the business I suggested, industrial/event type of use, things that are hard to classify, things that are that might not normally fit into one of these zones. So we'd want to permit a wide range of those residential commercial uses as well as non-polluting industrial uses. So we would still prohibit any kind of use that interferes with the quiet enjoyment of residential property. So if you are a if you own a home in the area, we would expect that folks that have owned a home have purchased a home with the expectation that they're buying a home in an area that has other kinds of activity around them, since most of this area is very mixed. And so we're not necessarily prohibiting things that you might prohibit if someone expected to be in an all residential area if they bought in a suburban area. But we are trying to prohibit uses that really would be noxious to residences, things like waste management, vehicle storage, warehousing, heavy industrial uses, and trying to only keep it to uses that can be, like McClung Printing is a great example. Business that wouldn't be allowed in LB, but would be, it's non-polluting, it's not noise generating, it's something that it doesn't cause nuisance to neighboring property owners. And then we would have a number of use standards for those industrial and auto-oriented uses, like they can't operate at night, need to be screened and buffered, and requiring CUPs for heavier auto-oriented uses. So that is the proposal. We are also proposing that in this zone, there be a parking reduction. So again, we're talking about areas that have a historic urban subdivision style. That means they have abundant shared parking. That means they have small lots. That means that they have a lot of buildings built right up to the street, kind of designed to be pedestrian friendly. And it's difficult for them to meet the parking requirement. This is sort of a funny image from an urban planning textbook, but the parking requirements in the U.S., most planners consider them to be excessive. They tend to result in more parking lot than building. And if you look at, for instance, the West End out on a Google Earth, you would see that that's what it looks like. That's what our parking requirements require. And that's based on the idea that every customer is driving a vehicle, parking it there, and that they need to have the maximum possible parking to handle all those vehicles. And that's not really how things work in a more historic, urban center. So that's why in our CB district, the downtown district, it's parking exempt. So all businesses that locate in the downtown area in the CB district don't have to provide any parking of any kind. It's sort of an assumption that there's shared parking, there's city parking lots, there's on-street parking, people will park and walk. And you have to do that if you want to achieve a pedestrian-friendly environment. You can't have a pedestrian-friendly environment and have enough parking space for everyone. So we're proposing that in this zone, we make this the second zone in the city's zoning ordinance to have a parking reduction. Though we're not proposing a full parking exemption, rather that if a use requires, I believe, 3 or fewer spaces, that it would not be required to provide any parking, and that if it requires more than that, the parking requirement would be reduced by half. So try to reduce, if there's just a small shop, somebody wants to stick something, there's a small row building, and they want to stick a little shop in there, and they need to come up with 2 parking spaces, they don't need to come up with 2 parking spaces, that's fine. Or, if they have a larger restaurant, we can reduce the amount. Maybe they can just fit 1 row of parking along the building or something like that. But currently you end up in a situation where, the old diner, Old Basic City Luncheonette over there, I believe had to tear down the building next to it in order to provide enough parking to meet our ordinance. And that's not a situation that you want in a historic area like that. And so it's another thing that we're proposing in this zone. So where do we envision putting this zone? We would the Planning Commission proposes rezoning all LB and LI parcels in the Commerce Avenue corridor to this new zone. For light industrial property owners, that would add some residential entitlement, but limit some of their industrial entitlements, so some of them might object to this. For LB property owners, it will probably only be an added entitlement. And then you may have some opposition from homeowners if they have an LB property next to them and object to that property owner adding entitlements. Entitlement, in a zoning is you own the right to do that thing on that land. So that's one thing we have to be conscious of in rezonings is, are we adding or reducing entitlements? We would also envision this zone being used on the Ohio Street corridor, very similar to Commerce Avenue. We discussed this with the Virginia Panel rezoning, and that was a perfect example. Virginia Panel, it's technically an industrial use, not allowed in the LB district that is currently zoned there. But if you rezone it to light industrial, well, then there's a bunch of other uses and there's a bunch of homes nearby that, we wouldn't want those uses near. We need a zone that allows some industrial types of uses that are clean industry but doesn't allow things that would be noxious to nearby homeowners. And so it's, again, very similar to Commerce Avenue, underutilized legacy buildings, parking limited. Virginia Panel is going to have to purchase additional lots in order to try to provide the parking, even though there's tons of on-street parking there that's not being used. And so it's also a possibility that we could use it for spaces with other legacy industrial buildings like 8th Street in Charlotte area, or perhaps parts of East Main Street. Planning Commission is not proposing rezoning to those parcels to this new zone, but it would give us a tool, it would give us a category in the future if something like the Metal Crafters building, for a while they were discussing sort of an indoor herb growing, which would technically be industrial production, and that's not allowed in the HB zone, but then they wanted to allow other retail uses to go along with Basic City Brewery, which does require them to be in a retail zone. And so they need something that's more of a mix, that's more flexible than that. So again, there's no action that's requested tonight from council. I'm just giving you all an update on where this process has gone and what we're likely going to be bringing to you. Planning Commission is going to consider a public hearing on a text amendment this month that would arrive, and that would just change the text. It would create the zone, but it wouldn't put any properties in it. And then right after that, they're proposing bringing a rezoning of all these properties, and we'd love to get some feedback from council on whether you like the concept as a whole. Do you have thoughts on the name? Do we pass a general rezoning, or do we wait for property owner participation? If we can do a general rezoning, just city initiated, and say all these properties that we point out, we're going to clean up the whole map, put these properties in that zone, and we have the authority to do that, and it's very defensible. But you may have a few property owners that object. Do you want to exempt those property owners? Do you want to leave?
Luke, I can't really hear you. Somebody close that door.
Oh, sorry. I'll get up a little closer to my microphone. But do you want to leave those property owners out if they object? That type of thing. Or, do you want to pursue a totally different strategy? Do you think this should all be housing and we should be clamping down on other uses? Yeah, all that stuff. Things to think about before we bring you the actual text amendment, probably next month. Hope that was a helpful orientation to what we've been working on.
Anyone have questions for Mr. Jude?
I do have a couple questions, Mr. J. Just so I can wrap my head around it, I presume that the parking requirements that you speak of are based on a combination of the use of the space and then the square footage of the space? I mean, is it that simple that there are different equations to apply? Or what?
Yes. In our zoning code, it's similar to most zoning codes across the country. You have a list of uses, and each use has a number of spaces. So for a restaurant, you might need a space for every 200 square foot of floor area, or for a retail, but you might need one for every 250, or there's different standards for office, maybe one for every 400. So yeah, there's a whole calculation there that goes on, and that determines your total parking requirements. If somebody comes to us and says, I want to start a restaurant, we say, great, you need 27 parking spaces. How do you come up with that? And in some of these areas, that's very difficult.
Gotcha.
So.
And then the other question, I think you started to answer it, but just to clarify, with the way the new proposal would be, would there be any industry particularly that would need to be already exempted because they're already there? I mean, some of the heavier industry that we see along the edges of that.
So we would not propose rezoning the heavy industrial parcels that are along the river. That's where Augusta Lumber is. And that'd be a big change. We're just proposing the ones that are sort of in the residential area that are currently zoned light industrial.
Okay.
I don't believe that any of the existing businesses would be made non-conforming except the self-storage located on Bayard. I believe it's Shield Self-Storage, their location. That would become non-conforming if you rezoned that property. And the auto body shop on Bayard would require a conditional use permit. So you could grant one with the rezoning to them to continue operating. Non-conforming doesn't mean that the business would have to go away. It would just mean that if they went out of business, or if the building were to become vacant for 2 years or more, that they couldn't put that use back in.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Can't think of any others that would become non-conforming, yeah.
Thank you, Luke. That'll bring us to item number 8. Item number 8 is to consider a resolution authorizing the city to accept approximately 250 acres of land located on 0 South Delphine Avenue from DuPont Company. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of council, the E.I. DuPont de Nemours Company proposes to gift the city of Waynesboro approximately 256 acres of undeveloped land east of South Delphine Avenue. Generally, the property is east of the former plant site and east of the Delphine Avenue. Value of the real estate contemplated in the gift is $830,000 and produces nearly $7,500 in real estate taxes annually. As a phase one environmental site assessment has been completed, and staff have considered the advantages and disadvantages of accepting the property as a gift. We do not have immediate plans for improvement or use of the property. Potential uses of and benefits of the property include, but are not limited to, recreational uses such as biking and hiking, view shed and corridor protection, and potential connections to other recreational facilities and uses to the east and northeast. The ESA, the Environmental Site Assessment, notes the likely historic use of property as an orchard. Commentaries provided as well regarding the common use of pesticides in the orchard industry and the associated the associated residual presence in topsoil. No other environmental concerns are raised by the study. Outdoor recreation and natural beauty are significant contributors to Waynesboro's brand and quality of life. The undeveloped land provides new capacity, or would provide new capacity for the city to build upon its brand and quality of life offerings and improve its competitive position in the region in this regard. My recommendation to the council is to accept the donation.
Any questions from Mr. Hamp?
No.
Okay. No questions. Do we have a motion to adopt the resolution?
I'll make that motion.
All right, Mr. Allen. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
Thank you, Dr. Hossetter. Do we have any discussion? All in favor of adopting the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries 4-0.
Mr. Mayor, before we move to the next item, Mr. Jude has slid me a note and points out that it's his belief that much of the land is currently in land use and as such does not produce the real estate value that I reported in my staff report, and actually produces far less than that. So in the current condition, the property does not, the municipality or the organization would not be foregoing $7,500 in real estate revenue. Actually, the number would be less than that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke.
We'll just say yes louder.
All right. Item number 9 is considered introducing an ordinance transferring $39,000 from the Fleet Fund to the General Fund to purchase a replacement street roller for Public Works Department. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, as the ordinance proposes, we'd like to replace a street roller that has mechanical failure beyond repair. We'd originally programmed replacement for this piece of equipment for fiscal year 2022, but as I say, the roller is currently out of commission. The funds originate from the VDOT Urban Maintenance Program and have been set aside for streets equipment replacement.
Any questions for Mr. Shaw? Do we have a motion to introduce this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Terry. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. And is there any discussion? This motion will carry over till our next meeting. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes, sir.
Item number 10 is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating funds to receive from Waynesboro Redevelopment and Housing Authority in the amount of $6,300 to Stormwater Fund to reimburse the city for stormwater projects funded by the Community Development Block Grant. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, as stated, these are block grant funds. The city crews completed a stormwater improvement project along Sumac Avenue. We replaced a couple of culvert pipes there to reduce recurrent flooding. The city crews donated the city donated time and labor, and community development block grant funds are being used for material and equipment cost. This is receiving funds.
Any questions for Mr. Shaw? Do I have a motion to introduce this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Terry. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any discussion? This will carry over to our next meeting also. Item number 11 is to consider making an appointment to the Economic Development Authority Board for an unexpired term ending August 31st, 2021. Mr. Hamp.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Ms. Brenda Aukard is presented in candidacy for this unexpired term this evening.
Do we have a motion to appoint Ms. Brenda Aukard?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do we have a second?
Second?
Terry? Yeah, thank you, Terry. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Thank you, Ms. Brenda, for volunteering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 12 is to consider making an appointment to the Library Board of Trustees for an unexpired term ending August 31st, 2023. Mr. Hamp.
Ms. Brincy Patino is presented for consideration.
Okay. Is there a motion to appoint Mr. Patino?
I can make that motion.
Thank you, Dr. Hofstadter. Do we have a second?
Second?
Terry? Thank you, Terry.
Whichever mask.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Mr. Patino here tonight? Well, thank you if you're listening.
Impressive resume, so
Yeah.
thank you, appreciate it for their service.
Item number 13 is correspondence and calendar. Mr. Hamp.
I don't have anything this evening, sir.
Okay. And then that brings us to item number 14, citizen comment period. Has anybody signed up to speak?
Yes, sir. Mr. Nicholas Salzman.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan. You're going to have 4 minutes to talk.
Yes, sir.
We got the green light, keep going, yellow light, start winding her down, and red light, you got to apply the brakes, okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you, sir. Your name and address for the record, please.
I'm
You
Nicholas
can take
Salzman.
that off if you want to.
Thank you. I'm Nicholas Salzman, resident of 909 Gardner Street.
Thank you, sir.
So I'm also an owner of a commercial building in downtown Waynesboro, 143 North Wayne. I come before the City Council tonight as a citizen, disabled veteran, and business owner. I'm here tonight to express my concern for the Economic Development Board appointment process and the current state of economic development in Waynesboro as a whole. Being made aware of an important board resignation largely via council agenda is troublesome. Further, the appointment of a candidate found outside of the view of the public reeks of malfeasance. I'm a proponent of data-driven, measurable, and quantifiable metrics as indicators of progress, though tonight I feel it's best to focus on the easier qualitative measures of economic development. As an entrepreneur, I had local professionals warn me not to attempt to develop in Waynesboro. Many of those warnings came from long-term Waynesboro residents and businesses. I can share my challenges and firsthand experiences, but despite the experience of one individual, it's extremely problematic that there is a negative reputation towards economic development in the community as a whole. For the qualitative measures, who doesn't like to fondly think of the era when manufacturing here was king, professionals were desired in the community, and downtown storefronts filled? We had some of those gentlemen just here tonight. We can debate at length over potential reasons the state of posterity is not maintained, but regardless, it has happened. Waynesboro is positioned geographically and from an infrastructure standpoint to accomplish great things, yet we still haven't. We continue to lag behind peers in our area in most meaningful economic indicators. If we want to judge the efficacy of the current board, we need to look no further than Main Street, and not in a metaphorical sense. Vacancy is still high, buildings are progressing from dilapidated to blight, and white elephants exist in our central business district. These cannot be blamed on recent economic conditions, such as COVID-19, as they've existed for many years prior and persist to this day. There's been some movement and progress downtown, but these are largely due to pent-up inflationary demand. The simple economic principles of supply and demand apply here. There is still too much supply and not enough demand. I'm sure we're all in agreement here that we want Waynesboro to be a great economic hub that provides much-needed jobs for the citizens and grows the community while retaining the small-town appeal. Unfortunately, we need to be introspective to our record of economic development and simply admit that what we've been doing hasn't been working. There are great opportunities available now and in the near future to help with a transition to a digital economy that has seen unprecedented success in similar localities. But we need business and thought leaders that are prepared to seize those opportunities and work outside of the traditional comfort zone that has seen the town languish. Waynesboro needs to be economically and mathematically viable for investment, and I urge you, even if we don't have all of the proper answers or solutions right now, to just realize that the process is not working effectively, and the side effects of not correcting the issues now may continue for generations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. Anyone else, Mr. Howe?
Yes, sir. Mr. Terry Kent.
Okay.
Good evening.
You heard the rules, so just go right ahead.
Terry Kent, 408 Loudon Avenue. Glad to get the mask off. That was your cue to laugh. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. In 1936, FDR delivered his Democratic Convention acceptance speech to a nighttime crowd of more than 100,000 people in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The highlight of his speech that night were the words, "There's a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given. Of other generations, much is expected. This generation has a rendezvous with destiny." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. penned these words, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." End of quote. This, I believe, for all Waynesborians is our defining moment. I'm here simply to challenge all of Waynesboro to get involved politically on the local level. It's here on a local level we can discuss our personal property taxes, our real estate taxes, our utility rates. It's on the local level we can discuss the textbooks that our children and grandchildren are using. It's on the local level we can discuss if our nation's history is being rewritten and if we agree with that. I mean, what we've heard here tonight has stirred me that there's such a need for all of us locally to get involved here on the local level, the level that affects us the most. Adolf Hitler said in 1925, "The great masses of people will more easily fall victim to a big lie than a small lie." End of quote. Just because something is said repeatedly, whether from a pastor's pulpit or a speaker's podium, does not mean it's true. We all need to find out for ourselves, just like many subjects here tonight. Last week, I turned 65. The years behind are less than the years ahead are less than the years behind. It matters not what year I was born or what year I die, but it does matter, especially to me, what I did concerning the years in between and what I do concerning these years in between. In closing, I challenge you, make a difference, find out the facts, even like some of the subjects we're speaking on tonight. Find out the truth and declare them in the right places at the right time. The organization I work for has several different sayings, and one of them is, "We're a little different, but the difference is good." I love Waynesboro, and I believe that our city that can be said from all areas of our state. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, sir. Okay, no one else has signed up, so that brings us to item number 15, and that is a motion to adjourn this meeting. Do we have
I'll
one?
make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Do we have a second?
Second?
Thank you, Terry. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0.